Welcome in, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today. We're going to be diving deep into a topic that, honestly, almost every single one of us has wrestled with at some point. In this explainer, we're taking a really close look at the science of a restless mind. We're going to break down exactly what is happening in your head when you just can't seem to turn your thoughts off. So, let's jump right into it. Okay, picture this. It's midnight. You've got work tomorrow. You are lying in bed, literally physically exhausted. But your brain? Well, your brain has completely different plans for the night. It's aggressively replaying this totally random, slightly embarrassing conversation you had like 3 years ago. Or it's rewriting an email you already hit send on. Or maybe it's building an entire elaborate argument with someone who doesn't even know you're upset. You tell yourself to stop. Just stop. Go to sleep. But it doesn't, and that leads us to the ultimate question. Why won't it stop? Listen, if this sounds familiar, I want to validate your experience right here, right now. You are not losing your mind. You're not broken. You're actually experiencing one of the most deeply wired neurological features of the human brain. And today we're going to look at the exact science behind why this happens. Section 1. The overthinking brain state. Let's start by totally reframing how we look at this phenomenon. We so often hear advice that treats overthinking like this bad habit, something you can just distract away or somehow cure by simply thinking positive. But it's way more complex than a simple habit. It's actually a highly specific brain state. Neuroscientists don't just call it overthinking, they call it rumination. Rumination is repetitive, passive, self-focused thinking about negative emotions and experiences. The absolute key here is the word repetitive. It's the same thoughts, the same worries, just cycling endlessly on a hamster wheel without any actual resolution. It feels like you're problem solving, but you really aren't. And I think this next point brilliantly illustrates the trap of rumination. This quote comes from Dr. Susan Nolan Hoeksema at Yale University, who spent decades studying this exact topic. She found that chronic overthinkers are not thinking more clearly, they are thinking more frequently. Because you're generating such a massive volume of these circular thoughts, you're actually crowding out your brain's ability to engage in real, productive reasoning. Your brain isn't solving anything, it's just spinning its tires in the mud, which, crazy enough, actually leads to worse decision-making. Section 2. Your brain's idle engine. So, if we know what rumination is, we have to ask, where is it coming from? We're going to look at the main medical suspect behind this endless looking. Deep inside your brain, there's this network of regions called the default mode network, or DMN. Think of it like your brain's background app. This network activates whenever you are not focused on a specific task. When you're staring out a window, taking a shower, or lying in bed in the dark, bam, the DMN takes over. Now, the DMN is actually incredibly important for us. In a healthy state, it helps us self-reflect, imagine the future, and process our past. But for chronic overthinkers, this network becomes a bit of a rogue agent. The crucial point to understand is this. In an overthinking brain, the idle engine is running way too loud, and the off switch is basically broken. There was this fascinating 2020 study published in the journal Neuroimage that looked at the brain scans of chronic ruminators. They found that these individuals had a hyperactive default mode network. But even more importantly, and this is wild, the studies showed they had much weaker connectivity between the DMN and the brain regions responsible for switching attention away from it. So the engine revs up, but the brain literally struggles to put the car in drive and move on. Section 3. Stuck in simulation mode. But why on earth does the brain keep this engine revving? To understand the motive behind this neurological loop, we need to look at how our brains process the future. Your brain doesn't just react to the world, it constantly predicts it. It runs these endless simulations to figure out what might happen next. And it really, really latches onto unresolved files. Things like a difficult conversation you just had, an uncertain outcome at work, or a perceived threat to a friendship. When a situation feels unresolved, your predictive brain keeps the file wide open. It runs these simulations over and over, trying to find a safe conclusion so you can regain a sense of control. Which leads us directly to this incredible insight from neuroscientist Dr. Martin Paulus. He describes overthinking as a failure of the interoceptive prediction system. Now, I know that sounds incredibly complex, but let's break it down together. It just means your brain is expecting a resolution that internal thinking simply cannot deliver. You cannot resolve a complex relationship issue or perfectly predict the future just by analyzing it in your head alone. The loop doesn't end because the answer the brain is so desperately looking for, it just doesn't exist inside that loop. I want you to really take a moment with this next concept. The brain isn't trying to torture you. It is literally trying to protect you. Overthinking is simply your brain's somewhat misguided attempt to keep you safe.
It truly believes that if it just analyzes the threat long enough, it's gonna finally find the answer that makes everything okay. It's a defense mechanism, even if it's one that ultimately makes us pretty miserable.
However, just because it's trying to protect you doesn't mean it's harmless, right? Chronic looping carries a heavy cost. First, it ironically reduces activity in your PFC, your prefrontal cortex, which is the rational decision-making part of your brain. Second, this constant state of stress keeps cortisol levels elevated, which research shows actually damages the hippocampus over time. Your hippocampus is what puts memories into proper context, so when it's damaged, every past mistake feels like it's happening right here, right now. Finally, rumination actively maintains and worsens anxiety and depression. It just keeps the emotional wound wide open. Section 4. The Midnight Amplification. So, if rumination is a brain state driven by a hyperactive idle network and these unresolved predictive files, why does this all feel 10 times worse at midnight? Well, during the daytime, you have external tasks competing for your attention. You've got emails, your commutes, conversations with coworkers. These external demands actively suppress the default mode network. But at nighttime, there are no tasks. There are no external anchors. The DMN is no longer suppressed, so it just expands rapidly to fill the silence of your bedroom. And this brilliantly illustrates the vicious cycle that traps so many of us. First, you can't sleep, and that sleep deprivation immediately amplifies the reactivity of your amygdala, which is your brain's fear center. Second, that hyperactive amygdala starts feeding threat signals directly into the expanding default mode network, giving it terrifying new material to loop through. And third, because you aren't sleeping, you miss out on REM sleep. Now, REM sleep is absolutely critical because it strips the emotional charge from distressing experiences. Without it, you lose your brain's natural emotional regulation, pretty much guaranteeing the whole cycle repeats the very next night.
Section 5. How to break free. Okay, we've looked at the intense neurology of the problem, but don't worry, we are definitely not going to leave you stuck in the loop. Let's look at how science says we can actually intervene and break free. Here are 4 specific, science-backed strategies to interrupt rumination. First up is task-based focus. Because the DMN quiets down when you have an external task, doing something simple and structured, like a deliberate 15-minute walk where you literally just focus on your surroundings, can immediately interrupt the loop. It forces the brain's attention outward. Let's look a little closer at the other 3 strategies. Another fascinating, highly supported clinical concept is scheduled worry time. Instead of fighting the thoughts all day long, you give them a designated container. Say 20 minutes at 4 p.m. to just write down and obsess over every single thing bothering you. By doing this, you aren't ignoring the thoughts. You're actively training your brain. When a worry pops up at 10 a.m., your brain learns to defer it to that scheduled window. Over time, this actively weakens the automatic nature of the rumination loop. It's a total game changer. Then we have mindfulness. And listen, this isn't just some wellness buzzword. It is literal neurobiology in action. Neuroimaging studies have proven that regular mindfulness practice actually reduces the hyperactivity of the default mode network. But more importantly, it strengthens the physical neural connections between the DMN and your attention control networks. Essentially, mindfulness acts like physical therapy for your brain, rebuilding and reconnecting that broken off switch we talked about earlier. Finally, addressing the root threats through therapy helps close those unresolved files for good. But the overarching, absolutely crucial takeaway from all of this is this. The goal of all this science, all these strategies, is not to never think. The goal is to think with resolution. We want to train our brains to move away from passive, endless looping and move toward active processing, where we can ultimately release the thought and just move forward. Your brain is this magnificent, predictive machine that is simply trying its hardest to keep you safe. Once you understand the mechanics of the default mode network and those simulation loops, you can start working with your brain instead of fighting it in the dark at midnight. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question to really reflect on. What does your overthinking brain loop on the most? Once you identify the file your brain refuses to close, you've taken the first real step toward finally switching it off. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and keep